Hoa kantaga namako wa ambetula e ni o wazi o planking telo. Da ka daku wa waktani waniri o planking telo. Oyate wichani kile hukuchi ala o ontaya ama blazer yo. Mi waka pataha wa yang namaji yo. Wichayaka echeki ontaya ho anamakopte ye. Le mi daku ye angapi ki otaya toka iwachinch nia ontelo. Echachaki tokata oinaji wa oyanklepiki ekta hounta tani pikat nue. Le unkipiki he washtelo. I had said greetings and good day and welcome my relatives, and I shake your hands with a good heart. And in my hands, I hold my heart towards you, and it's good for all of us to be here and look to the forever ones, the elders that were always here before humans, and let's acknowledge the relationship with all, the life-giving force of the sun, moon, and stars. It's time to wake up, relations. Today will be a good day, and I'm here in a humble way. I'm in a common, ordinary man of earth. And I honor you in this circle of life with me. I am grateful for this opportunity to acknowledge you. To creation, I thank you for the ultimate gift of life. Thank you to the mineral nation that has built and maintained my bones and all foundations of life experience. Thank you to the plant nation for supporting my organs and body and giving me healing herbs of sickness. Thank you to the animal nation who offers loyal companionship in this walk of life. To the human nation encountered along my path of the sacred wheel of earthly life, I thank you. To the spirit nation that guides me invisibly through the ups and downs of life and for carrying the torch of light through the ages, I thank you. To the four winds of change and growth, I thank you. You are my relations, my relatives, without whom I would not live. We are in the circle of life, coexisting, codependent, and co-creating destiny. One is no more important than the other. One nation evolving from the other, and yet each is dependent upon one above and one below. What is above is also below. And all of us are becoming mystery. And I want to thank you all for this life. Homitakoyasi. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. Ooh, that's loud. Welcome to Mohawk Consultation's second annual Peace with Nature Public Forum. I'm Louisa Finn. I'm a fourth generation Smiley family member. My ancestors started Mohawk Mountain House in 1869, also started a tradition of public conferences, bringing people in to talk about subjects of import in society, both local and global. And Mohawk Consultations has carried on that tradition. In the tradition of Quakers, I'd like to start with just a moment of silence. I invite you in this moment to consider your ancestors, whether they are related or unrelated, and how perhaps directly or indirectly they influenced your being here today. So just a moment. Thank you. Mohawk Consultations acknowledges with respect and gratitude that we are living in and sustained by Lenapehoking, homeland of the Lenape peoples. The first people who lived here were the Esopus and Menacing peoples of the Lenni Lenape nations. Wars and Indian removal policies forced most of the Lenape westward. Many of their descendants continue to live here and throughout North America. We honor all Indigenous communities, past, present, and future, as we seek to create a safe space for all. A little about Mohawk Consultations. We're a volunteer board founded in 1980 by Keith Smiley. Our mission is to support the interrelationship of all life on Earth and find practical means for sustainability. Keith's daughter, Sandra Smiley, continued to shepherd the organization after his death and is now a director emeritus. Myself and my cousin, Patty Madison, who's here today, we continue to represent the Smiley family in this organization. We do 3 programs a year: public forum, an awards ceremony in June, and a conference usually in the fall. I invite you to check out our website, and later on we'll have some newsletters out for you to take if you'd like one. I'd like to thank today's program committee, Brad Berg, Katie Nepler-Tarski, and Jason Taylor, who are all here today. And I'd like to thank Ulster Savings Bank for a very generous donation to make this possible. And of course, I'd like to thank Smiley Brothers Incorporated and Mohawk Mountain House for supporting our programs and giving us the space to do this. I think our founder, Keith Smiley, would be really pleased with today's program. When he started Mohawk Consultations, he was concerned about, quote, the importance of developing an effective method of assisting people to comprehend and to feel they are a part of the total functioning of the Earth's ecosystem. So he was making the distinction between the word environment and ecosystem, and noticing that environment made it feel that this was outside of humans. In our meetings with TIOKASIN, John, and Bob, I do want to say that Bob Toth, who's on your program, was unable to be here today, one of our speakers, because he fell ill. TIOKASIN, John, and Bob, and we were planning this event together. TIOKASIN often would reject the idea of focusing on a takeaway. We often talk about takeaways when we're planning events. And he would say, let's do Western in concept. And instead, he would advocate, let's focus on what people are giving. I found this passage from the book Presence, Exploring Profound Change in People, Organizations, and Society. It reminded me of this. The environmental movement is mostly focused on how we can be less bad, how we can take or destroy less. But what if humans, as a species, actually have a purpose? What if we have something distinctive to contribute, something to give rather than just take? No alternative path forward may exist without rediscovering why we're here, because only then can we start to see what we actually have to give. And that will require us to think differently, to think as if we are a part of the universe. It interested me that John, Bob, and TIOKASIN met at a conference on technology and spirituality. I think it was like a decade or so ago. I found that interesting. When I first met with them, the subject of complexity theory came up. We had a great hour in the Lake Lounge, and great conversationalists, all of them. And just by chance, I had been reading a book, Notes on Complexity, a scientific theory of connection, consciousness, and being. I'm not much of a light reader, I have to admit. But I was looking for reasons to be hopeful in this complex and somewhat dark time we find ourselves in. So here's one thing I discovered from reading that a distinguishing feature of life's complexity is that in every single instance, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. even if one knows the characteristics and behaviors of all the individual elements of a living system, such as a cell, a body, or an ecosystem, one cannot predict the extraordinary properties that emerge from their interactions. In complexity theory, these surprising outcomes are called emergent properties, or just plain emergence. So I can think of no better guides than TIOKASIN Ghosthorse and John Briggs today to help us see one powerful possibility for emergence. TIOKASIN Ghosthorse is Itozip Chola and Mini Koju Lakota of the Shakowin Oyate. He is an indigenous person who practices philosophy and draws upon the language, history, culture, and traditions of the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. John Briggs is author and co-author of well-known books on science and creativity, including Fractals, The Patterns of Chaos, Looking Glass Universe, Turbulent Mirror, and 7 Life Lessons of Chaos. His work focuses on the usually unrecognized place of the whole in human consciousness. Well, please join me in welcoming our speakers today.
Thank you. For the session today, my task will be to read some elements from the book that Bob Toth, TIOKASIN, and I have been working on for the past 8 years. It's called Earth Mind. TIOKASIN is going to break in with comment as only he can do. The thesis of Earth Mind is relatively simple to state, but its ramifications are subtle and extensive. Another technology thing here. Whoops. Here one. Hello. There we go. So here's the simple part. Earthmind proposes that the human species came into existence endowed with 2 radically different but complementary modes of consciousness. Both modes can be understood as having arisen from human evolutionary history and our interactions as beings embedded in an unfolding natural world. The first mode to consider is the consciousness that people are most familiar with, the consciousness that dominates human activity and thinking on the planet today. In our book, we call it anthropocentric consciousness. Anthropocentric simply means human-centered. And I think you heard that TIOKASIN is coming from a place that's quite different from human-centered. The anthropocentric mode is object-based consciousness, meaning that it perceives and organizes reality in terms of separate items, separate physical items like grasshoppers, automobiles, and subatomic particles, as well as separate conceptual objects like justice, God, and that elusive, imperious, all-consuming conceptual object, the self, the me, the I. Operating for the past several thousand years in a kind of inflamed and swollen state, anthropocentric human consciousness has constructed a large variety of cultures and societies with common characteristics. People have come to believe that the anthropocentric mode is what makes humans intelligent and civilized. Anthropocentric consciousness is a utilitarian, tool-making consciousness whose artifacts archaeologists find in the abandoned shells of ancient civilizations. It is the mode of consciousness that shapes imagined realities, creating hierarchies, bureaucracies, cause and effect relationships, processes, and movements from point A to point B. It emphasizes nouns over verbs. It objectifies time. It casts a net of awareness crafted out of opposition, polarization, duality, competition, ambition, success, and failure. It is closely tied to the primitive fight or flight response. Depression, mistrust, and positive and negative assessments of self-worth are all rooted in the anthropocentric mode, as is curiosity and the desire to know how things work. No question that anthropocentric consciousness is vital for our species, and it takes a central role in our ability to fashion tools and language to understand causal chains and to forge fruitful discriminations of all kinds. It's vital for our ability to accumulate and pass on factual knowledge and to have an awareness of ourselves as separate individuals. That said, our current situation on planet Earth is telling us that human beings have fallen into a toxic fixation on anthropocentric consciousness while suppressing a second, complementary mode of consciousness, what we're calling the holocentric mode, the mode of consciousness centered on the whole. TIOKASIN often quotes Black Elk, who observed that for holocentric consciousness, the center is everywhere. There's one of them. This second mode of consciousness shows up on the walls of caves where paleoarchaeologists shine their torches. What do these figures mean? As with attempts to decipher or interpret the meaning of a great work of art, it's easy to misapprehend the activity of the holocentric mode of consciousness if you're looking at that activity strictly through a human-centered lens and translating it into human-centered concepts. Put simply, the holocentric or earth-mind mode of consciousness experiences the world as interrelated, interwoven, a whole whose center is everywhere. We might characterize this consciousness or awareness in terms of an upwelling of feelings of trust, blessing, wonder, and unity with the whole universe. This holocentric or earth-mind mode of experiences itself as embedded in a continuous with the activities of animals, plants, rivers, clouds, and stones. The earth mind experiences that while these things appear separate from us, they are not in fact separate. To the earth mind, the world is alive in a way that anthropocentric consciousness cannot explain or even comprehend. Lame deer, Lakota, described this holistic aliveness and trust in terms of spirit. Quote, "The spirit is everywhere," Lame Deer wrote. "Sometimes it shows itself through an animal, a bird, or some trees and hills. It speaks from the Badlands, a stone, or even from water." Neuroanatomist Ian McGilchrist's compendium of research done in the last 50 years on the role of our cerebral hemispheres, left brain and right brain, probably most of you have heard of that, seems to uncannily confirm a picture of two modes of consciousness that are intertwined but radically distinct. The brain research lends credence to a picture of cultures grounded in either anthropocentric thinking or holistic thinking. The left brain renders the world as something explicit, a place of explicit objects, both physical objects and conceptual objects, like a stage with separate actors and separate scenery watched by a separate audience. By contrast, the right brain presents a world that feels implicitly unified, whole, a whole that is there, but you can't pin it down. Traditional earth-mind peoples live in ways that are guided by the implicit whole. The tools of the implicit metaphor, irony, and connotation are right brain specialties, and our indigenous friends use these tools extensively to make the whole present. McGilchrist writes that there are a number of reasons for supposing, this quote, "supposing that the right hemisphere plays a primary grounding role in the relationship between the hemispheres. The primacy of wholeness," he says, "means that the right brain deals with the world before separation, division, analysis has transformed it into something else, before the left hemisphere has thingified it. That's a word that some people tell me is quite ugly, but that may be a good thing. We now live in a human world where most people are dominated by left brain, utterly thingified thinking and experience. We live in it, obviously, in a commodified culture. That's thingification. We live in a highly intellectual culture, although it doesn't seem that way sometimes. But all those concepts floating around, the academic lingo, that's all anthropocentric. Perfectly good in certain circumstances, but a disaster in others. The right brain experience, by contrast, is an experience of a world grounded in the whole. Against fearful odds, native peoples have kept humanity's holocentric, grounded mode of consciousness alive and vibrant. Meanwhile, most of humanity has given itself over to an orgy of anthropocentric thinking. For example, at this time in history, unmoderated anthropocentric consciousness has taken a wrecking ball to nature. Meanwhile, many have come to believe that our tool-making thinking in the form of artificial intelligence will somehow save us. Actually, if you look at science magazines, as I do monthly, the schemes for technology to save us are endless. EarthMind's overall message is that although anthropocentric consciousness has been largely pushed into the background in the last 10,000 years, it can be brought forward again to temper our anthropocentric knowledge so our species can once again, in TIOKASIN's phrase, live with Earth. Now, this is a point in the script where Bob reads, so I'm now Bob. All right, let me advance this. After years of discussions with TIOKASIN and other native thinkers, we feel confident in saying that the original peoples who organized their lives in their traditional ways are peoples whose consciousness is grounded in the whole. Here are just a few of the places in native thinking and culture where this primary awareness and experience of the whole may be observed. And I won't go into those directly. The words on the list should not be taken as ideas or concepts. They may seem to be ideas or to our anthropocentric, thing-focused way of thinking, but to the original peoples, these seeming concepts refer to fields of being, to flowing energy where individuals experience themselves not as a thing bouncing off of other things, but where they experience themselves as fluid beings surfing the holoflux, as native philosopher Leroy Littlebear Blackfoot puts it. Let's explore some of these indigenous non-concepts concepts. What we heard and observed over the course of several year conversations with native interlocutors suggests that it would be hard to overestimate the importance that ceremony plays in earth-mind consciousness. An anthropologist observing indigenous ceremony from the outside might conclude, as many have, that a ceremony is an act occurring in sacred space and time regarded as distinct from profane space and time and practiced in a prescribed way for dogmatic or pragmatic purposes. But the reality is far different from that. We learn from our indigenous friends that each ceremony takes place in a shape-shifting continuum where ceremony involves harmonizing yourself and co-creating, TIOKASIN used that word, co-creating in the whole. We came to appreciate that harmonizing and continually rebalancing yourself with water, wind, animals, plants, that has effects we can literally not imagine. For our native friends, ceremony is a daily way of being. Native ceremony differs from the popular concepts of religious ceremony. Native ceremony is about participating in creation, and creation is not a singular event that happened in the past. It is a creative movement happening in every moment. They also understand that ceremony as an act of giving back or reciprocity, whether the ceremony is an impromptu prayer at a place where two woodland brooks join, an elaborate offering on the slopes of Mount Fuji in aid of healing the earth after a nuclear accident, a celebration of a distinct designated moment in the celestial calendar, honoring an animal killed for food, or at the transition point of an individual's life. The reciprocity that ceremony enacts is a reflection that all things depend for their existence on each other, and you heard that from TIOKASIN, and that each individual thing is inseparable from others. Reciprocity calls on the person to join the rounds of abundance by offering attention and acknowledgement of relationship. In that way, the individual does their bit to keep things moving. You have been animated and given your vital energy by the universe, and you are called upon to keep that energy in circulation. TIOKASIN describes reciprocity as unification. In it, you recognize that, quote, as a TIOKASIN quote, your body is in the soul, and everything is the soul. Now remove the soul. Everything is you without the container. It means the bird is the trees. It means life without ego. When you're mistreating that soul, you disconnect from life. Reciprocity recognizes that other beings are teaching you ceremony. By beings, TIOKASIN doesn't just mean organic ones, animals and plants, but the beings we anthropocents call mountains, wind, rain, rivers, stars, trees, rocks. Reciprocity is related to the dynamics of the holism packed into the potent Lakota phrase, Michuke Oyasi, usually translated as all my relations, a phrase now employed by many tribal people who are not Lakota to indicate the unique native orientation to what is. One Lakota teacher has offered a fuller translation of Michuke Oyasi, which goes this way: for all the above me and below me and around me things, that is, for all my relations. So you see in this statement that things has become relations. When TIOKASIN walks to town, he puts down tobacco as he goes, sprinkling it on the rocks beneath the trees in the running brooks. That's ceremony. At certain times of the year, he builds a fire in a pit and invites anyone who wants to join him in a dialogue with the fire. The fire is part of that dialogue. Often when he engages this informal fire ceremony, eagles fly over, a synchronicity, indicating the wholeness, a whole connection that's non-causal. When the eagles fly over, he says they join the ceremony, but probably, he adds, it is the birds who have initiated the ceremony, and he and others have joined. TIOKASIN says that, quote, the simple ceremony is of just going outside and building a fire and sitting there. We don't need these grandiose cathedrals and all that, end quote. Our native friends are always very careful about conducting ceremonies. Our friend Mendahi, an Atami Toltec ceremonialist from Mexico, calls this care being impeccable. Ceremonies are about relationships among beings, so one needs to be present in mind and body, otherwise the ceremony is meaningless. The ceremonies are the relationships, at least certain aspects of them. A sweat lodge and an ipi in Lakota or a temescal in Atami Toltec is a place where native ceremonies regularly occur. The act of building the lodge is a ceremony, as is what takes place inside the lodge. Ceremonies might follow prescribed protocols or be improvised in response to the flow of the moment. Either way, they pump the energy of attention into the holistic network of relationships, seen and unseen, that constitute the universe. The feeling of relationships is always in the background. Step on a fallen branch in the woods and hear it snap. You have a relationship with that branch. You are present in the world. Australian Aborigine Tyson Yunkaporta says, ceremonies and interactions with sacred sites, quote, keep creation in motion, are necessary for good health, end quote. All this is the action of the whole. Okay, we're going to... That's the next one. Okay.
Test.
Shut mine off.
So here's where I come in. Thank you again for joining us again here. This mountain, the springs. You can't hear me. So talk like right here. Rock star. Right, again, thank you for joining us here. My name is TIOKASIN Ghosthorse, and I come from the Lakota people out in the center of this continent in South Dakota. We are Lakota people in contact only 180 years ago with everybody else that came here. Our culture, although you may not see it as vital and alive, is in fact alive and vital. It means that much because it's regulated by Earth. And I think part of that is understanding, the dichotomy that we have to exist in here as we are surrounded by this anthropocentric mindset wherever we go. So I am told that by several of my honored speakers of the old Lakota that I've listened to, you have to understand this. There are truly no opposites. Truly no opposites. That duality can also be included, but not conclusively, as the only way to think, feel, and see. But in today's world, opposing forces exist in various aspects of life, such as sciences, religions, and governments. And governments are categorized as either liberal or conservative. Religions are divided into good and evil dogmas. And sciences distinguish right from wrong. So we live in a paradox of duality, I like to call it, or a parabox of duality, where the theory of time has a beginning and an ending. And opposing forces such as superiority and inferiority, cause and effect, problem, solution, rich and poor, and others coexisting in opposition. And through my life experiences, I have come to understand that distancing oneself from familiar expressions of relationship is different from the anthropocentric focus on rational connections, which can lead to losing touch with nature. And therefore, we spend our lives in search of selfness, looking for connections and yet not understanding the language of relationships. The relationship that I'm referring to is integrity with Earth, and with a language where it has no immunity to the lie, the deception of technology, and the antecedent of patriarchy or matriarchy. So each day we send children to schools where they spend 8 or more hours learning how to be human. But are they learning in ways that lead to growth and flourishing, both personal and societal? Will what, and more importantly, how they learn in our schools create healthy and sustainable human and non-human communities? But I say, isn't it about becoming good ancestors? So I'd said this many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, that this is the hardest time to live, but it is also the greatest honor to be alive now and to be allowed to see this time. There is no other time like now. We should be thankful for creation did not make weak spirits to live during this time. The old ones say This is the time when the strongest spirits will live through, and those who are empty shells, those who have lost a relationship, will not survive. We have become masters of survivals as Native people. We will survive this. And it is our prophecy to do so. It's already saying that we are going to survive this thing called America. And it is the popular mainstream belief that it takes a village to raise a child. But for me, as an Indigenous person, this phrase needs more coherent energy. So I'd like to dive into that fascinating world of Indigenous languages and explore the similarities and differences and make it so unique. I'm eager to discuss which dichotomy best captures the essence of my protest, which is more than just a mere chant, but a powerful expression of knowing beyond the standardized codified language of nouns. You will possibly read a different worldview or hear a different worldview, a non-worldly, non-imperialist approach when trying to understand the meaning of cliched language usage. And one cannot awaken someone pretending to be awake, with intentions often falling short due to the language indifference to expressive Indigenous languages accompanying Earth. Usually with the best intentions, it is back to the drawing board meaning of the Western mind. You see that. Beginning, ending, if it's not good, we go back to start over again. We keep seeing the ships land as we, as Indigenous peoples, have the view from the shore. And we're watching America continually going back to the drawing board to get it right, over and over. A recycling of the same ideas. And this is what I mean by one cannot awaken someone pretending to be awake. I ride with a young wild horse who understood before I became the 9-year-old upon its back. Holding tightly to the life-giving mane, I couldn't saddle a horse single-handed at this young age, nor lift a saddle, a harness, and summon up the strength to pull a cinch tightly enough to ensure that the oversized heavy leather that was invented to encumber a horse, imbued with free moment, was tightly in place. And once on the four-legged wildness and purity, I shook and rubbed my face, my head, and hair around its mane as he shook to feel who was on his back. And with an eye-to-eye glance, it was an instant communication of intuition that guided those few hours through the rolling hills. And he would guide me along ravines where there were choke cherries and wild strawberries and black walnuts and sandberries and wild turnips, ground cherries and wild plums, and I would eat all day and top it off with some wild onions or scallions. In the middle of the hot summer days, the Missouri River, flowing with Rocky Mountain sources, provided fish and great swimming and playing, and I have always wanted to be older than I am, even today. Even when I was 4, I didn't care about how much accumulated knowledge I would experience or how much I remembered. What mattered most to me was focusing on being conscious without being burdened by a conscience. And that led me to see differently as I sat on that hill on the prairie looking at the clouds at 4 summers young. There I sat, pondering when the stars would appear as the sun cooled at the end of the day. I watched everything that crawled or slithered by me, flew by me, or walked by me. And from the very beginning, I understood that human beings were not only defined by themselves, but also by Earth and all her life forms, such as stone, water, fire, and winds. And so today I wonder what humans are doing to human beings by placing their human-only concept of humanity above all life forms, giving us a vague definition of humanity. Without empathy for Earth, there are very few human beings and too many human doings that have illusionary savior behaviors for humans only. Again, one cannot awaken someone pretending to be awake. Western educational institutions offer an archaic and unrelatable teaching process that is disconnected from real life on Earth. This process strips us of our heritage and forces us to utilize reality instead of truly living with it. And the language used in the Western educational curriculum rationalizes an inherently flawed philosophy of scarcity. The languages used are based on the Indo-European model, which is characterized by neediness, over-extraction, and dependence, as if they are constantly seeking salvation and sustenance. They need to be perfect. They need to be correct. They need to prove. It can be a challenge when attempting to articulate a written work that incorporates both hierarchical, linear narratives, and the unexplainable nature of consciousness. The compulsory education system in the West has drained the wisdom and knowledge from indigenous minds. It has introduced foreign concepts that have no relation to the lands the system claims to have conquered. Despite this, indigenous peoples who live in harmony with Earth continue a Western paradigm that dismisses their thought processes. This has resulted in a systematic indoctrination that has led to the disappearance of cultures and the lands they were based on. So I'll go to this here. You've heard the phrase, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Albert Einstein. In Native Earth, extracted from the Inner Journey, Views from Native Tradition, Peter Mathiasen writes that in 1930, Albert Einstein visited a group of people who spoke to the Ute and Aztecan language, which included Hopi. He commented that among all peoples, 12-year-old children who spoke this language were probably the best equipped to understand his theory of relativity. Without ever seeing a book speaking the language of English or seeing a car, and they were so remote. And he continues, there seems to be no doubt that traditional peoples the world over have much to teach a spiritually crippled race, which, as Lame Deer said, see only with one eye. This half-blindness has been the curse of the white people as long as the Indians have known us. But this is Lame Deer. But we have not always been accursed. At one time, we knew the mysterium tremendum, and we must feel awe again if we are to return to the harmonious existence with our own habitat and survive. When modern man has regained his respect for the earth, when science has become a tool in the service of nature rather than a weapon to dominate it, then the lost paradise, the golden age, in the race memories of all people on earth will come again. And I'll quote my uncle. There is a way to live with earth and a way not to live with earth. Lakota have no word, a concept for domination. We have understood that communication is not just gifted to human beings, but that beings have already used intelligence for millions, perhaps billions of years before the recent entry of humans. And we need to use a relating language, a relative language, which when in relationship to all beings, including human beings, when we are born into this dimension, we are becoming earth. And we are living in this dimension, we are becoming earth. And we are leaving this dimension, when we are dying, we are becoming earth. A once continuous relationship without ever having to use a connection language, because we are becoming a relationship with earth. The living relativity to earth. Once again, to quote Einstein, the best equipped to understand the theory of relativity. Now we must look to those very same indigenous peoples who have been struggling to maintain living with reality rather than using reality. Words bear meanings from ancient languages, much older than the one I am using now. Proper use of our earthly tools is essential to create true magic. Illusions only lead to further disconnection from Mother Earth. And as far as I know, magi means one who makes magic by using the tools of the earth properly. Magi, such as a bird or fish using the wind and the sun, while the fish uses the water properly. The magician, which humans have become with their use of technology, is fooling them, even themselves, and thinking of being superior over those true magi. Respecting the power of words, not the concepts. The way indigenous peoples do, thank you. Respecting the power of words, not the concepts. The way indigenous peoples do, by understanding the meaning of energy, always in motion, and not the stalemated definitions of nouns. So I would like to finish right there by saying, to speak this language of earth, to understand the many dimensions that are here. In this way, tokahe wichake, oyate tokahe wichake means to always put others first. Not just humans, but earth. Because they were here first. These are our ancestors. We listen to them, the relationship that they have to give to us. We can never explain them as they have allowed us to live here. You see, this thinking that I was forced to think in the American way always made nouns out of everything and took the life out. And when I have to understand, I'm sitting here with John and Bob, when we first met in 2015, and the Carlton Risk, I think that's how they say Ritz, out in California at Silicon Valley, of all places, Half Moon Bay. The conference was about spirituality, consciousness, and the future. And I had met the originator or the inventor of the Intel chip. He was 80 years old at that time. He was an Italian. And I spoke right before him, and I had listened to him from here to there where Simon is sitting. And he kept staring at me. I kept looking at him. And he conveyed something with his looks, that something was familiar. The familiarity was the fact that he also saw what I saw, because he walked away from the invention of the Intel chip. He said that humans today could use it in the wrong way. And we have artificial intelligence today. And many people are kowtowing to that because it makes life more efficient. So when I'm in this place and understanding how Bob and John came up to me and said, we need to maybe formulate or talk about or write something or have meetings. For the last 8 years, we've been co-creating. And as always, there's no word for this. There's no word for that. There's no concept. So when you're speaking in verbs, there's no such thing as a concept. Think about that. There's only consciousness. That's something I have to say. Because a tree is not going to speak in concepts. A rock, the water, don't speak in concepts. If you do, let me know. Nothing is conscience. They're all in consciousness. Now, I know that the Western way of thinking demands that you have proof, demands that to get your education you need to do this and say that, and within the duality of thinking, talking, and being. So we're always in a duality mode. When I said in Lakota there is no opposites, it goes to many dimensions that the New Agers use today. But I just recently returned from overseas with people who are thinking or knowing this, and they can't explain it. So one thing I did explain to them, well, maybe your mathematical formulas are noun-based. And I told them about the conference we had in Leroy Little Bear in 1994, where they just discovered us having our languages and verbs only. And that freed them up, that quantum physics is encoded in our language, many dimensions. And I think that's what Westerners or Americans have trouble with indigenous people's ways, because it's older. So it's that time when you call it the environment, you call it nature when we don't have words for nature or environment. So what do we have? You know, what is present? And so we base our language as if, when I asked my mother, 89-year-old, she said, hey, son, we cannot speak Lakota without intuition. Without intuition. Because there's trees, rocks, all the wind, plants, animals, they communicate through intuition. So I'll leave it right there. Yeah.
Just make a a little footnote. Ian McGilchrist, whose name I mentioned before, the neurophysiologist who's sort of put together the last 50 years of work on the right brain and left brain. And he entitled the book in which he wrote about that, the book is close to 1,000 pages long. He called it The Master and His Emissary. And the master is the right brain, the holistic brain, and the emissary is the left brain, just what you were saying. And one of his theses is that the emissary has taken over the master. So you obviously made a shambles of the next part of what I was going to do. So let me try to piece this together. One of the ways to think about this holistic consciousness, because it should be obvious that when you try to think about the whole, you end up thinking in concepts. And so you deny the very thing that you're trying to elucidate. Is there an alternative? There's a fellow named Gregory Kahete, who's a Tiwa, an educator, philosopher, and he's made the point that the earth mind, the holistic mind, is a metaphoric mind. And I have a whole, you won't get to hear it, but unless you buy the book, which is not on sale yet. A whole section on metaphor. What is metaphor? The kind of metaphor that we're talking about is closer to the metaphor that poets use. And let me see if I can do a quick example. Let's just do this one. I mean, you may be familiar with this Robert Frost poem, which basically operates on a two-term metaphor. The tenor is there's a patch of old snow. Actually, it's the vehicle. One term is there's a patch of old snow. It's like a newspaper, like a crumpled up piece of newspaper, and it's giving me a message that unless I'd seen that patch of old snow, I wouldn't know. And that's a classic metaphor, and it's one thing suggesting many other things. Sometimes confused with symbol, but symbol is like a dove for peace, where the relationship between the two terms is fixed. A metaphor, it's evocative, and the holocentric mind, the earth mind that we're writing about, is a mind that, to take synchronicity as an example, you're doing a ceremony, the birds come over. The birds, and TIOKASIN captures that issue quite wonderfully. Did the birds create the ceremony that you joined, or did you create the ceremony that the birds joined? As soon as you think about that, you're in that holistic realm. You're now beginning to think in a holistic way. So that's, I could give you that's a patch of old snow, just for you to enjoy. So let me skip a whole bunch of stuff. Shaped like a gun, yeah. There's a physicist by the name of Jones who had one sort of wonderful quote on. Now this is a physicist talking about metaphor. He says, "I define metaphor as an evocation." Let me see if I got that. Yes, I define metaphor as an evocation of the interconnection among things. It is an act of consciousness that borders on the very creation of things, blurring the distinctions between them, even between them and their names. I think of metaphor in the larger context in which all things are related to one another through an underlying unity. Metaphor tantalizingly evokes this hidden synthesis through its dramatic juxtaposition of apparently unlike things. It's as if the poet, in using a metaphor, not only refers to a symbolic or ironic connection between two things, but hints at the very creative act itself, which underlines all naming and evoking processes. And if there were one thing, if I had to say only one thing about the 8 years or so that I've spent talking with TIOKASIN and others, it's that their view of the world is it's always layered and more subtle than any attempt to pin it down. And of course, my training has been to pin things down. I got a PhD in that. In fact, probably those of you who have PhDs in here, that's what you got your PhD in, pinning things down. So, let me see. There we go. I just get some of these others. Here's a little tanka poem. So, stuck in a vase, clusters of wisteria, blossoms hanging on the sick bed, spring begins to darken. Beautiful little piece. Here the images of flowers, the sick bed, the darkening light, and spring come together as a metaphor that invites the reader to feel what is mysterious and indescribable about the whole universe in which one is alive. And I think if you listen closely to what TIOKASIN was saying, almost everything he was saying was in service of that feeling, right, of being with Earth. Poor fellow, he can almost not utter any statement without that being kind of at the center of it. Children feel that, right? Children have that empathy, which means we all have it. That's why we go back to the beginning of what I was saying when I started talking. that those two modes of consciousness are what we've been endowed with. But then think over your own personal history, how that was, I won't say beaten out of you, but it was something out of you. It was pushed out of you to some extent. And often people gravitate toward photography or the arts or something, religion, something to reactivate that because that consciousness is so real. And then you think about the world that we've constructed, our noun-based world, and how unreal it is compared to that. I mean, I know that if I spend a day watching television, watching the news or something like that, I feel insane after a while. But if I go outside and I hear the birds, suddenly it becomes real again. So Kahete says, and he's very interested in child development, that when a child develops language and begins to use it extensively, and this is Kahete's quote, the holistic experience of the metaphoric mind begins to get chopped up and labeled until eventually it recedes into the subconscious. So to some extent that's the history of many of us. Okay. So I will just mention that that we in the book we felt it necessary to invent a neologism, a new word, to escape from the fact that the word metaphor is used in so many different ways. That's why I prefaced what I started with here by saying it's like the poetic metaphor. But I think this is worth going into in the native context, almost everything is a metaphor, a holophor. I'll give you some examples. Holophors, like poetic metaphors and artistic metaphors of all kinds, are not meant to be translated into explanations or ideas. They're meant to be experienced. They're embodiments. Perhaps they're a little like the icebergs with the most of their significant mass lying below the surface in the currents of the implicit. When you appreciate the Milky Way as a river, or the Pleiades as the origin of humans, you're engaging in holophors that are, in their way, as true as the observations of astronomy. That's a tough one in a scientific context. Black Elk describes the sacred pipe as a holophor packed with an intimation of the whole and vibrant with the mystery that underlies it. So here's Black Elk. Hi-ho, the holy man says as he takes the pipe, this pipe which you have brought to me is really as sacred as the original pipe which was given to us by the white buffalo calf woman. Indeed, the one who understands they are really the same. But this pipe which you have now brought is especially sacred, for I see that it has been placed within it the whole universe. Couldn't get more metaphoric than that, right? It's another quote he adds to it. He says, "You have taught me that the round bowl of the pipe is the very center of the universe and the heart of man." So here's some others. That's the medicine wheel, the four directions, right? And some of the basic ceremonies have to do with basic directions. It's ceremonies that I've adopted myself. They're very simple, and I mean I don't have all that surrounds that, ancestors, all of that rich. But nevertheless, when I conduct that ceremony, I can get that feeling of being with Earth. The hoop dance, wonderful. The forms that are made by the dancer are birds and animals of all sorts, wind, you name it. We had a whole session on the hoop dance. Black Elk spoke of the hoop of the world. TIOKASIN told us, when you think about what Black Elk and other Lakota people think about, the hoop is not just a closed circle. It's always a spiral. So you're always moving and you never return to a second ago. The hoop involves and implies balance, co-creation, shape-shifting in the flux, reciprocity, all our relations, ceremony and mystery. Those are all things that were on that list that was up here a while ago. If you reflect on what your experience was hearing TIOKASIN play the flute, that is a connection to the whole, right? He brought it all. It brought it all in. He came in. You could say that as you listened to him play the flute, you were experiencing your own holocentric consciousness, right? There he is, as a younger man. So flute music, we say, is a holophor, or a metaphor, through which we participate in the mystery of the whole. And like Black Elk said about the pipe, it's the same. If you can imagine going through your day, constantly coming in contact with that mystery, how vibrant and different your life would be. So I had a funny story I wanted to tell. Funny in some sense of the word. When TIOKASIN was in Sweden, we were talking about this event, and I mentioned to him that both Bob and I were going to be seeing the total solar eclipse, because Bob just had to go out of his driveway in Cleveland, and there it would be, and I was going up to Vermont, northern Vermont, to see it. And typically, TIOKASIN fashion, he just sent me a link, and I went from that link to another link, which was a little more clearly articulated, where a Navajo man was saying that you should be doing the opposite from what I was doing. I was going up to see the eclipse, and the Navajo was saying, well, you should not look at the eclipse. And the reason, let's see, I'll read it. So this happened, okay, I just explained that. The Diné man told a story before he explained about the eclipse, about a time before humans when an argument had arisen among the relatives, the animals and plants and wind and so on, all those who preceded human beings. And the argument was about whether there should be immortality or whether beings needed to die. Coyote came along. Now, watch out. It's Coyote. Coyote came along and said, I have a way to settle this argument. And he picked up a pebble and he said, I'm going to throw this pebble into the water, and if it rises back up, we'll have immortality. And if it sinks, everything must die. and obviously the pebble didn't come up. That meant that in the universal flux, everything, including the moon and sun, would have to die. Solar eclipse was the death of the sun. But the Navajo then said, what you should do when there's a solar eclipse is you go to your hogan, and if there are any windows, you block them up. So the only light coming is down the chimney. And then you sit and you sing and you pray. And you're watching on the walls, and in that hogan, the vibration of the light as it sinks and the sun dies. And then as it comes back, the light as it comes back. So that's renewal, death and renewal, which metaphorically, holophorically, as we'd say, captures, in some sense, everything. And then I reflected that TIOKASIN often tells us about putting tobacco down, and occasionally he'll give us some tobacco so that we can put it down. He's shown us over the years that when he puts the tobacco down on those walks, the gesture has nothing to do with seeking favor from some god or spirit or force of nature, and that's what the anthropologists are telling you, that's what it means. And how far the truth is from that is sad. He's making new holophores. He's co-creating the world, humbly participating in the constant rebalancing and renewal that must take place in a universe that is flux, or holoflux, as Leroy Little Bear put it. The earth-mind mode of consciousness participates in a holophoric universe where everything is reflected in everything. So all I've been saying is obviously a simplification. But what else can you do with your pinned down language that we got PhDs in? Now, there's a whole section, I don't know how we're doing on time here. Are we?
10 more minutes.
10 more minutes? Oh, wow. Give or take. We'll probably take. I don't know, do you want to go into more on intuition?
Let me do it this way first.
Okay.
Let me do it this way. Hello. 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 Rock star. All right. I wanted to say something a little bit about what Bob was explaining a little bit, and I was thinking about the linear sense of thinking, how we go along thinking, and yet the spiral of languages that we come from as indigenous peoples, without beginning, without end. We all constantly on this spiral, moving neither up nor down, but always moving in motion. So if nature is constantly co-creating with you, it's not that we go to nature to listen. What we do is when we're with nature, we listen with nature. We don't go there to learn how to listen, because Earth knows how to listen to us, because nature, she gives us everything. Fire, water, food, all the time, every second. So how can we go back on a linear sense of being when everything is moving, not forward, backwards, sideways, but just is? A language of presence. It's not a, the Lakota language is not a present phobic language. Neither is it denatured language, neither is it biophobic language. We're not afraid of what is nature. So I wanted to say this, that this should take up half of that time. When I was in school, three decades ago, wow. Well, anyway, I wanted to say that this is a little story that I read, and I only wrote it down from memory. So, and it was a vivid story, so I wrote as much as I could. And I'm going to name this guy Eduardo, who learned about Western education. Eduardo is a cultural anthropologist. He wanted to arrive 2 weeks before a conference in a remote mountain to get a feel for the place and prepare his thoughts on delivering a cultural paper to other scholars and academia for possible publication. Eduardo rented a car, carefully mapped a route to the remote village, and began to travel. But there was a breakdown, and a car rental agency said they could send a mechanic in 5 days, at the least due to the roads and scheduling. And Eduardo thought that would indeed interrupt his preparation days and travel time. And he asked the local people of the village if there was a car agency or someone who he could hire to take him to the remote mountain. And he found no one going in that direction, let alone anyone having a vehicle. They all walked. Now, this is really a kink in his plans. It put a kink in his plans, but he had to get there as soon as possible, or at least arrive a few days earlier. He would plan to work on his way there from his laptop computer, or write if need be. He was sure there was someone in the next village who had a car, and began to walk without listening to the locals saying no one had owned a car the rest of the way. As Eduardo walked, he came upon an old woman who was going to the same conference, but had started 2 weeks earlier from down the mountain with her dog and bundle on her back. The old woman had invited Eduardo to walk with her, and that she would show him the way. He couldn't take the chance to wait and see if there was another car going in his direction or on the main highway. Eduardo really was in predicament and resisted before accepting that at least he may arrive a few days earlier and have some semblance of an intelligent paper to deliver with apologies. And along the way, he often thought if he could just get there ahead of time, so he would try to hurry the old woman and her dog along for this to happen. Day after day, the old woman would walk from village to village and stop to eat and visit with the locals. Eduardo began to think he would never get to the conference on time, and would ask every time for a car, at least someone younger who could walk faster than the old woman. Still, there was no luck, no one who could do so, but an elderly man who was going to visit relatives only in the other direction only a few days later. So now Eduardo was in for a long trek to the conference. Still, he wished he had stayed at the place where his rental car failed, and at least he could have caught a ride and gotten there faster and saved time. Saved time. He soon resigned himself and comforted his Western thoughts of time is money and money is time. Day after day, he did the same thing, awakening while the old woman was doing a ceremony to greet the new day and giving thanks. Then eating was another ceremony, and even drinking a cup of water became a ceremony. Another ceremony for strength and guidance while walking and giving thanks to all the trees and flowers and birds and sky and plants, and even the little ants along the way became a ceremony. And at the end of each day, they would arrive at a different village and the same visiting, dancing, stories, eating, and ceremony. He thought he would never get there. His computer battery had run out of power, and along the way, none of the villages had any electricity. So he threw that idea out and began to write what he had learned at the university about culture. What frustrated Eduardo the most was that the old woman could hardly talk with him except to say, "This way," as he followed. More reluctant than ever that they would ever get there. He had lost his watch somewhere along the way and had no idea what day or time it was, and had practically given up on the idea of ever presenting a quality paper, even if that. Then one morning at the same awakening ceremony and other ceremonies, the old woman said, "We are here." And they walked over the hill a day before the conference began. Eduardo stood behind the podium and began to offer apologies and describe his circumstances of why the expected scholarly paper was not prepared. Then something happened. As he began to describe his journey along the way, what he had done for the last 2 weeks with the old woman, he began to understand that he learned more about culture than if he had ever taken the fast road in the rental car and had arrived 2 weeks earlier. All the songs, dances, food, language, ceremonies, relationships to the people he unintentionally made along the way, that even through his textbook resistance to culture, to culture that he had no need of a paper. He would be able to deliver something alive, someone living, people living reality and not using reality, as he had learned through words on paper. Eduardo now lives among the people. Eduardo now lives with the people. Eduardo now lives.
So I've got the perfect complement to that. So we'll end with this story. This is a story that I heard one day. My brother Jeff and I were down visiting an elder, Ophelia Rivas, who's an elder of the Tohono O'odham people on the Mexico-U.S. border. And she has this wonderful ramada, sort of a shaded area that extends off of her very simple house. And so she was accommodating us with tea, and we were sitting talking with her, and she told the following story. She said, "My mother told me the story of how this farmer was working in the fields. He was really tired and grumpy. He came home, did his normal things. He went to bed early and expected to go back to the fields. He had a dream in which these warriors came and said he was being called to a meeting. So he got ready. At the time, they had these little lanterns you could light and carry. I think it was a kerosene they used. So he took this little light and he went with the warriors. In the story, he was being brought to a meeting in which he was told that he did something wrong. Did he know what he did, and that the people were suffering because he did something wrong? He claimed, "I don't know what I did wrong. Can you tell me, please, what it is?" In that pleading, he woke up. He got his lantern and he walked the trail he had always walked. And he followed his footsteps all the way back to the fields. He finally found a big ant mound. When he was grumpy and was haphazardly walking on that trail, he had accidentally kicked a pebble into the anthill's entrance hole. Around the whole anthill were dead ants. So we removed the pebble from the opening and he left the lantern. He told the ants, "The lantern will help warm you up and you can go back in. I'm sorry this happened." That's the lesson I tell young people, Ophelia said. Be careful how you walk on this land. You don't know what is there. You may have missed something that was important, that you may have affected in some way. Those are the kinds of lessons I learned. It's the same way in ceremony. You regard everything as sacred.
Okay, we'll switch over to questions and answers. There are a couple of mics that will roll around. Thank you. So just raise an arm.
Thank you both for your presentation. I'm a troublemaker, so I apologize. TIOKASIN already knows that. So there are two things that really struck me about what you said, and then I want to return to another point. So the two modes, bam, out of the gate, already we're doing dualism. This is the good, this is the bad, already out of the gate. And I'm like, no, this is going nowhere. I'm going to talk about the anthropocentric in a second. The other thing is the holism. So this is coming from I'm speaking from somewhat of a Buddhist background. You can say that everything is interconnected without saying it's a whole. Yeah, those are distinct. When you said that TIOKASIN playing the flute was the whole, no. That was TIOKASIN playing the flute. The exceptional, unique phenomenon of playing the flute wasn't the whole, it was something else. So back to the dualism, So my friend, he's a Cherokee scholar, and he was living in Tlingit, which is the southwest United States. Tlingit means the humans, the people. I'm sure that's the same in many languages. I don't know though. And which brings me back to what TIOKASIN I heard in his speech, his blessing. That he spoke about the family, the plant nation, about how we're the animal nation. So never did I hear him speak about the whole of the earth. He was speaking about relation. Yeah, I was talking about all of our relations. You brought it up yourself, this connection, and that humans actually have a special and important place in that. So the deprecation of the anthropocentric is the bad, the holistic is the good, that doesn't seem right. It seems to be more that the humans have a place, and it's a place of connection. And this framework that you were working with was very confusing to me.
You want to?
Go
ahead. I don't think, I'm sure I didn't say the anthropocentric is bad. Oops, sorry. I'm sure I didn't say the anthropocentric is bad and the holocentric is good. I think what we said is that there's an overemphasis on the anthropocentric. Obviously, it's impossible to talk about the whole without indulging in anthropocentric language. So, you're pointing out rightly that there is I don't know what to call it, a contradiction that's built into this kind of discussion. But TIOKASIN refers to intuition. You have to ask yourself if does the whole have no meaning? You think it has no meaning? Okay. Well, there's no argument. We're at loggerheads. If you are discarding the concept, the word, we can't go anywhere with that. I don't think. Do you think we go somewhere?
Let me say this. Test. Okay, heard me say that hello? Am I? Okay, good. You heard me say that there are no opposites. So nothing is excluded. The way we talk traditionally is we bring extremes, either case, wherever it's coming from, and we come together to the weak word of compromise. So even though you have a different, it's not the right way, nor is mine the right way or the wrong way. So there are no opposites. That means there are no borders. There's no need to rationalize why you are right or why you are wrong. That's duality.
So it's like the ceremony of the eagle. initiated, those would be opposites, but what I heard is that you and the eagle initiated it together.
Maybe so.
Questions? Comments?
I love the concept of the holoform, and I had a question about something I think I didn't quite understand about naming things. Some Native American authors, including Robin Wall Kemper, emphasize the importance of naming things because, from her perspective, she said that naming things allows you not just to recognize them, but to acknowledge them.
Mm-hmm.
So I wondered if you could just clarify your earlier comment about the role of naming.
Yeah. Let's see. We're on the border of this paradox that is ultimately inescapable. And it's the paradox of the individual and the whole. We are both individual and indivisible from the whole. And we keep trying to cast it in one or the other. So, sometimes we're trying to get to heaven or some other holistic place and deny the individual. Or, as our culture has done, we have emphasized the individual to the exclusion of the whole. And you see that in people's lives where they'll spend their lives in a kind of selfish way, and then as they get older, decide that they're going to go out and work in a soup kitchen or something to give back and affirm their connection with the whole. So I think that it sort of lies at the basis of where the confusion. I'm missing part of what you were asking.
I just wanted you to comment on the role of naming. When you name something, when you give something a name. I understand that there are things we can never name, like the feeling that music evokes, for example. There's
Right.
no word for that. But some Native American authors have said that you need to name things in order to recognize and acknowledge them. So I just wanted to
So one way to look at it would be to say that you can name something to pin it down, right? To lock it in place, or you can name something as a metaphor. You can name something in a way that acknowledges that the name is not the thing. And I mean, I think there's a great confusion in our culture about whether the name is a thing. And you can just think about the concept of branding, for example, which is a big deal. If you watch television much, you're going to see Donnie Deutsch, talking about you've got to curate your brand. I'd see students who talk about that, curating my brand on social media. To me, that's a horrifying concept. Because it means you're narrowing it down. You're not recognizing that what lies at the bottom of all this is mystery. We don't know what the hell we're doing, or who we are. But naming or recognizing the individuality of something has a great beauty to it, as long as you don't think that that's what it is. It requires a certain amount of naming requires a certain amount of humility. Let's put it that way.
Let me explain it this way. As far as I know, Michaje, the interpretation, very roughly, because we can't really translate Lakota into this language of nouns. So Michaje would be voicing the relationship to the energy which you encounter. So naming is kind of like what we wait for traditionally when the child begins to show its behavior, its traits. Then the energy identifies as to what it wants to be named, like a tree or a plant. They tell you what they want to be named, And if you lost the listenership or the ability to hear it intuitively, of course you're going to come with nouns and say, this is that, and this is that, and this, and it works in my culture, it works in my whatever, so we'll name it and put a period behind it, we'll stamp it, because we want to subjugate it and objectify it. That's a big difference. And as far as I know, you know, when we talk about Native American authors, I know Robin. We've been on panels before. We even did some kinship series. But I'm coming from that culture. Robin is going to that culture. You see, it's a big difference. So you can say Native American, or I cannot say Native American. I can say Native because I'm recognizing Native before America ever got here. So that's what I've been talking about. I respect Robin very much because she's helped me with thinking. So in that way, you think about the way Michaje is that they identify themselves to you. I was talking this morning about how, you know, science now takes little clips and puts them on plants and they hear a sound coming out of it and it's making this music. But Grandma and Grandpa would say, oh, we're planting this seed, we're talking to that tree, or we're listening to that tree, and here's what they're singing. And so our traditional songs are from that, and then there's a different plant, there's an animal. Everyone has a different sound, and we have songs for that. And if America would just get their freedom out of the way and give us our being free back, that would be so cool.
Something that might help with the naming might be if TIOKASIN would talk about, we have a name, we say water. This is water. Now to me, that doesn't really tell us much. Can you share the how you would identify what we call water?
Yeah, we have no word for water. How would you say it? If there's no word for water, what? Wet? Would you describe it this way? Cold, hot? You drink it. What do we do? What's the action of water? So the word that we have is mani, but it's not a name for that. It's describing energy and then the motion of the energy. So mani, in using the alphabet of the West, M-N-I. E is something like voicing. Ni is like living. And in mani is that which is in relationship between you and I and all things. So mani is voicing the living relationship between you and I and all things. So we have to put things in there because that's the nature of this language. Water has become a thing and not a living being essence. So what do? We dam it, we bottle it, make it a thing that costs, where water is free and it's in its way. But we, as the West, have to make it a product of our thinking. Now, just think about, we let that go. Water will return us to normal. And that could go across many things that we have normalized that nature has not normalized. Because we're still thinking in domination forms that we can do as we please to nature because nature was given to us. And that's not true. We are adapting nature to our needs rather than the opposite way. So I think it's time that's going to change because Earth is going to change that for us anyway.
Could I just add, it occurs to me that Kimmerer is doing something, trying to do something that's important in balancing between rational science, which relies on naming and classification and categorization and all of that, and this sense of of the natural world as living. And she's trying to bring that sense of life back into the cold categories of scientific investigation.
Of this society.
Yeah.
We have a question on the side.
This is a question for TIOKASIN. How might you suggest how we can start to undo colonial thinking through our verbiage and through our interactions with each other every day and the choices we make in the words we use for white people?
White people? Someone said, what's the color of your mind? So, for me, it's like, originally and in the old way, there is no word. There is no word.
Mic is off.
Oh, it's not on?
It's
on?
Oh, somebody over there said it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
In the old Lakota language, which is not the present one we're using today through dictionaries, and I feel that we cannot live a dictionary, but we can live with a living language. So therefore, to be self-centered is that when we are intermingling or intercommunicating with each other, if decolonizing is how colonizing is how we learned, especially me, I learned English through colonization. So what I learned was how to do things that made me survive and exist within this society. I'm unlearning this colonization. And I sure don't want to repeat by relearning what I've learned here in the first place. And because it's a loop, it goes back, keeps going back, and tries to find rationalization for why we must continue this way when it's not conducive to living with Earth. So for me, it would be this. Write something about yourself. Hand it to another person. And have them circle these words. I, me, my, mine, and ours. And you begin to decolonize.
One last question. Back here.
I have a burning question, but I'm going to give it over to somebody else.
I think it was about 3 years ago that TIOKASIN was speaking in front of a group, said it was a very short thing, and I got an insight which helped me to understand some of the problems we're having. In speaking, I got to see that, the holocentric mindset that you're talking about is experiential, and that the problem of paradox comes out when we try to use words. In the experience, there is no paradox. Right. Like if we were talking about like a willpower with no control or force. That exists, but it's very hard to speak about that with words. In words, it sounds contradictory. Yeah. And so it's like when listening to trying to describe what the two of you are trying to describe, we have to imagine the experience that the words are trying to express and not get caught in the words.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent observation. But I would point out though there is a number of issues that you can't avoid. I mean, if you divide the world into here's rationale and talking about it in concepts and all of that, and then here's experience, then you end up with a world in which there's art and there's science. And which world has the most power right now? Well, obviously, it's the science world. So one of the things I think one needs to do is to try to make the case as best you can that the rational, not that it's not viable or useful or any of that, but that it's limited. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do. And that sometimes involves, indulging in paradox. One of the things we'll be doing in the book is talking about quantum mechanics, which is one of those places where paradox shows up, and one of the things that's happened in the last 20 years is a reductionism, a push toward believing in, even against the evidence, that there are these things down there somewhere that everything is built on, and that we can get a formula for those things, and then we can apply that formula with a giant AI computer and be able to master the universe. I mean, that's really what's going on. And so you have to be sort of patient to point out, well, all these fantasies that you're having about what's happening at the quantum mechanical level are nothing but fantasies. And so you're ending up with well, I don't have an explanation. Owen Barfield called the quantum level the unrepresented level, because you can't conceptualize it without falling into paradox. So there's that. In the structure of the conversation that we had here, there was a mixture of things said rationally and experience, and trying to find the right mix of those things in order to convey what's going on. And I would say that the McGilchrist material, which I had great hesitation about whether to even bring into the book or not, because it tends to drive people into the scientific reductionism. But there it is. There's no doubt, if you look at the scientific evidence, that the left brain has this anthropocentric cast to it, and there is something that neurologists call holistic going on, and it's given. It's probably not only humans, but probably mammals and maybe all the way down that has that division. The dualism is not necessarily a bad thing. It's only a problem if you think it's the only thing.
So we're going to shift gears now. So here we are up on the ridge in the woods, overlooking the lake. Just heard a lot of fascinating and inspiring ideas. So I shouldn't have to tell you why we are calling this a holocentric break, but I hope you can approach it that way. And Katie is going to explain what we will do after the break. So please don't make us call you back. Please be ready to meet up again in 15 minutes, please.
Could I say that before we go out there, a little to Robbie's question and maybe overall, that I was thinking about how intuition and domination cannot coexist together.